This is the end, my only friend, the end.
Are you an assassin or a soldier?
In November 1983, high-ranking NATO officers from across Europe and North America descend into a nuclear bunker. For the next 7 days, they are going to take part in a war game. It is called Able Archer.
Able Archer was a routine command post procedural exercise. Now, the forces taking part in a command post exercise are not the whole armies and divisions and tanks. Nothing deploys except the rather unfortunate signals squadrons and signals regiments who'd go out and man wartime posts and practice sending messages to each other.
Able Archer is an annual war game that rehearses communications in the countdown to a nuclear war. Signalers send messages according to a tightly controlled script. These messages are then picked up in the NATO command bunker and passed on to the players of the game.
1983 has been called the year of living dangerously.
Not just because of the NATO Able Archer exercises. A whole series of explosive incidences, from the completion of the Korean Jumbo to the false alarm of a U.S. nuclear attack reported by a Soviet satellite. A lot was going on. All humanity was in danger. NATO had procured a new communication system called Bright Dawn. It was to be tested and deployed for the first time. Little had been made public about the political conflict of 1983. If it had, we would have acted differently. Bright Dawn was procured by NATO to enable communications as quickly as possible after a nuclear attack. The shortwave radio system was physically suited to accomplish this task. Bright Dawn operation manuals called for deployed systems in each of the NATO member capitals. The hub was to be located at SHAPE headquarters in Belgium and supported by the American flagship in the Mediterranean, along with a flying command post for the NATO Commander-in-Chief. The communications squad responsible for the deployment was housed 20 kilometers south of SHAPE headquarters. The deployment of equipment began at 3 a.m. The hangars where the communication shelters were stored lacked height, making them unsuitable for the vehicles and shelters. Several challenging issues were discovered in relocating the shelters. Cables necessary for the shelters to operate were not duplicated. Fixed power supply cables had to be dismantled. Only then could the shelters be pulled from the hangars. All mobile devices were mounted in the shelters so they would not fly around during travel. Dawn brought the promise of a sunny but cold day. A truck with a crane arrived from the Belgian repair unit at SHAPE headquarters. It began the task of lifting the shelters onto the trucks. This was the first time the shelters had been loaded, and positioning of the shelters was precision work. Finally, the shelters were lashed with steel cables to the transport truck for safety. It had taken longer than expected, but the shelters were safely secured to the trucks. The heavy generators, permanently on standby for a commercial power supply, also had to be pulled from the hangars. A lesson learned during this time revealed even though the soldiers had driver's license, not all had the necessary driver's license for vehicles and trailers. They had little experience with trucks and trailers. Finally, after many hours of grueling work, the readiness to march was established. The generator refused to move. The brakes were locked. The truck passenger had to get out and release the brake manually, which delayed the start. When the vehicles arrived at the destination and assembly site, they found that 2 nights' rain had saturated the ground, and it was evident that the heavy vehicles would sink into the ground. The deployment had come to a standstill, and caution was required. The trucks and trailers would become trapped in the muddy ground. Unfortunately, the trucks did not have all-wheel drive, and the heavy generators would weigh them down even further. Finally, 2 trucks were parked back to back, making it easy to quickly go from one shelter to another. Gradually, with the help of everyone, all vehicles were brought into position. The generators were fuel guzzlers. We didn't have a mobile fuel tanker to fill the generators daily, so a wheel loader was requested to bring an old, static 1,000-liter heating tank. The generators consumed 300 liters of diesel every 24 hours. The soldiers filled 20-liter canisters every few hours to keep the generator topped off. Operational procedures called for the 2-meter-long antenna mast segments to be unloaded and connected together until they reached a height of 16 meters. This task is not easy because the antenna mast must be upright. The individual segments needed to be stabilized with guide wires. Our mobile command post, a private caravan trailer, was camouflaged. Incidentally, the Director of Communication and Information Systems, a German Air Force general, was enthusiastic about the idea of the command post and smiled when commenting about the exterior color. After several hours of setup, the ground stakes set, and power cables laid, communications to the remote sites were established. The Rockwell Collins IT system was state-of-the-art. The soldiers, who also performed part of the maintenance, were slowly introduced to the sensitive devices. To the chagrin of the American logistics officer, Shape had paid a lot of money for training to maintain the devices within the hangars. My 60 soldiers from many NATO countries were enthusiastic about the new state-of-the-art high-frequency system. However, what I missed as the responsible officer was a coherent operational concept from those who designed and procured the system. I often asked myself, how could we have communicated through bright dawn without a mobile radio relay annex system? It was an exercise then, but a dangerous reality in 1983.